g'day everyone, welcome back to another Bush Creek fly tying tutorial. This tutorial is on tying this little number, which is what I call my Razzamattazz nymph. So this is really just a variation of a more traditional Czech style nymph. There's nothing inherently particularly special about the tying of the nymph per se, or the actual way you do the pattern, but more so in the materials that I use for this nymph. So by itself, it looks like a sort of reasonably sort of flash, sort of attractive nymph. The real sort of I suppose not so much advantage, but the real change comes with the materials that I use. Now I'll talk about two types of materials just before I get into the tying, so that because it needs to be there's a little bit more specific, but in the first instance, so these are three of them. I tied in 4 different colours, orange, yellow, green and pink. Because of the material, the stuff that you use for tying the pattern, what you'll end up with is, and if I bring my UV torch in, you'll end up with this effect. So you'll end up with basically a UV hotspot sort of at the back, and that's what you can get out of this pattern. Really easy to do that, and it just comes down to the materials. So that's the Razzamattazz nymph, and what I'm going to do is I'll just move the vise out of the way for the time being, and quickly talk about the materials, so that because there's a little bit in them. Okay, so the body of the nymph itself is done with these. So these are, sorry, I'll get them into the screen here. So these are pantyhose, women's pantyhose. Now, for those people in Australia, this is the one you're after, and I get it from Coles supermarket. For those people overseas who aren't in Australia, I've probably got some bad news for you. So to get the effect out of the fly that I managed to achieve with these particular brand of pantyhose, you need to find something that's going to look exactly the same, look like it. So you can't just use any old pantyhose. It needs to be these ones, or a brand of pantyhose that acts in the same way. So they're just standard everyday, get the natural ones. You can get whatever size fits you, whatever works for you. So it's this one itself. Now, when I zoom in a bit further and get some more clarity in when we're tying the fly, hopefully you'll pick out exactly what I'm talking about. But in essence, you want the sheer glow one, and it needs to pill. So when you cut it, you want the edges of the cut edge to roll a little bit and fray a little bit. Okay, so all I end up doing is basically roll it up into a bit of a tube, if you like. Try and get this on camera. Here we go. And then I just come in with the scissors and I'll just edge up that. And then I just trim away a piece about 5 to 7 millimeters wide. You don't have to be terribly specific, but you don't want it too narrow, but you don't want it too thick. And then what you'll end up with is a loop of cut pantyhose, and then from there, all I do is basically obviously cut it, and that's what you tie it with. And you can probably get 3 or 4 flies out of this piece. Okay, now the real trick to it comes once you've cut it. Those edges start to fray, and then just before I tie it, I give it a slight stretch, and it's probably a little bit hard to see, and hopefully you'll pick it up when I get to tying the pattern, and you'll be able to see because I'll be zoomed in a bit better. But the edges fray up, and that gives you this slight furry effect for the body of the fly, which of course you then cover with a bit of a shell back, but you get this furry edge effect. So that's the body material. It needs to be that. If you try it with other types of pantyhose, you may not get the same effect. I've tried several different brands, and they're the only ones that do what I want it to do. So the rest of the body is basically just coloured up with markers, right? So I'm using Sharpie markers. Okay, now you don't have to use Sharpie markers, although I would say you do need to use at least one. And the UV effect comes from using these, which is the Sharpie neon markers. And you'll get them in a bunch of different, or a handful of different colours: orange, pink, yellow, green, and so on. And I think there's a blue in there, even if that's the way you want to go as well. But they're neon ones, and they'll come up under UV. Right. So that's, you need at least that one. The rest of the pattern can be sort of whatever markers you may have. But in these ones, I generally use a neon colour, then a corresponding colour but not neon, and then I use on all the different colour patterns a bronze, so a Sharpie bronze marker. Get that in the picture so you can see. Bronze, and then just a dark brown. Right. So that sort of, those two colours sort of start to form the head, and then these two colours form the body, or the abdomen, and the fly. So we'll see, and you'll see how that goes. All right. So they're the two key bits of materials that we're going to use. Other than some shell back and some other bits and pieces, and I'll walk you through those as we go. But at this point in time, what I'll do is I'll just quickly reset and zoom in so we can get into tying. Okay, so this is a bit more of a close-up of the pattern, and hopefully everything comes a bit clearer as we go. So that's what it looks like close up. So the hook I tie these on is a number 10, just a scuds type hook or grub hook, whatever hook you use, happen to choose. I think these are fire holes, and then I weight these hooks obviously. So what I have on here is 0.025 inch wire, lead wire with 15 or so wraps, several wraps across the back, and I'm not going to go too far into wrapping how I wrap that, but that's the wire wrapped on. Okay, so you fit your wire on whatever perhaps wire you want to use. So just to anchor that down, I'm using a flat thread, so I'm just using UTC, just in a random colour. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a particular colour. A lighter colour works better because it'll take the markers as well. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and catch on, and then just bring the thread, flatten it a little bit, and bring the thread through, around to the back with a few turns, and trim away the waste. Okay, so now at this point, once I've sort of got the initial thread and wire anchored on, I'm just going to pick everything up, and I'm going to rotate my hook so that the bend is proud and everything's orientated down. And then I'm going to tie my rib. So the rib for the fly is just simply Maxima Chameleon. Okay, just a really light one. This is 3 pound, and a length of that. And I'm just going to catch that in at the back here with a few turns and lock that down. And then I'm just going to come back up, and we park that rib out of the way for a little bit, and just taper up into the back, into the lead. Now before I reorientate all my stuff, I'm going to come in with my pantyhose material. So you can see that I've got a fairly thin strip here, and it's curled up. It's started to curl up. So what I do is I pull it just gently. You don't have to pull it hard, and just pull it apart a little bit. Now I'm hoping that if you got the clarity, that you should be able to see how it almost has this frilly edge to it, a bit of a pilling effect. Now that's just the individual, fibres of the nylon starting to curl up and fray a little bit, and that's exactly what you're after. So I'm just going to come in, and I'm going to catch that in at the back with a few turns, lock it down, get that out of the way, and then I'm just going to start moving my way forward, and I'll just bring it around and then reorientate my hook back up into final position for tying. And flatten the thread, and I'm just going to cover up some of this lead. You don't have to go through and do the whole lot, as long as you've got a little bit of mass in there. In fact, it's sort of really, I think it's a little bit counterproductive if you do try and sort of cover it all up, because you just build up thickness in the fly, and then that sort of counteracts the whole concept of having a really thin fly. So I'm just going to bring that down, and then when I get to the end, I'm just going to do a couple of whip turns to lock off that UTC, and then I'm going to trim this away. And then we don't need the UTC anymore, so I'm going to park that away. I'm then going to come in with my final thread, which will be the thread that forms the head, and I'm using uni thread in dark brown in 8/0, and I'm going to come in at the eye and bring that UTC up a little bit and lock that thread in and trim away the waste. And then I'm going to do a couple of turns of whip finish, because I'm going to wrap the body and I don't want that thread bouncing off. So a couple of turns of whip finish just to hold it there. So now the next part then is obviously coming forward and wrapping the fly, and it's really no different than using any other sort of similar type of material and or technique. Around the bottom, and then just taking my time. You got to be careful, because if you sort of lean too hard on the pantyhose material, it starts to pull apart. So you just got to be a little bit gentle. Just take your time. It doesn't have to be super tight wraps. You just want to make sure that, and we've lost it. Here we go. This will happen on occasions. You just back it up a bit and go again. You don't have to be super tight. You just want to make sure that you cover pretty much most of the fly. Now, if some of the lead shows through, that's not really an issue either. I haven't seen any real deterioration in the performance of the fly because there's lead showing through, and because of the effect it creates, you don't really notice it anyway. I don't think the fish do. So I'm just going to bring that pantyhose material all the way up to my thread, and then I'm going to catch that in with 2 or 3 turns to finish it, and then I'm going to trim away that excess pantyhose thread. And you know, if there's enough left in the strip, you can put it in a pocket for another fly. What I'm then going to do is I'm just going to bring my thread back a few turns, about a millimetre or so behind the eye, and then I'm going to catch that in with a couple of turns to whip finish again, so I don't bounce off the thread. So that's the body of the fly basically covered. So now we're going to go through and mark it. So now the first thing I'm using here is the neon Sharpie, okay, and I'm going to just basically come through and colour up the body of the fly. Nearly all of it is what I'm going to do, and you'll notice that as you do that the pantyhose material starts to peel up and fray even more, and that's perfectly fine. You don't want to go too hard and rub too hard, otherwise you'll start to pull it all apart. But a little bit of fraying is not too bad, and you just get that colour in there all the way through the pantyhose. And because it's nylon, it'll take the ink, and it won't lose that ink. I haven't noticed it losing the ink when it's been fishing, so it must be all good. And it'll go through to the UTC anyway. So that's the neon. We get most of the body done with that neon. Next Sharpie is just the standard orange Sharpie. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start about the middle of the fly, so in about here, and I'm just going to do a little bit just to give it a bit of darker colour, and sort of create a transition of colour from that lighter orange through to a darker orange around about the middle of the fly. Now this won't show up on the neon, but if you haven't, where this neon marker shows through, it will show up on the UV. So once I've done that, the next one is the bronze metallic. Get the label, bronze metallic Sharpie, and I'm going to just come in and start from the head and just bring that back just to create a darker transition of colour from that orange towards the head itself. You don't need a whole lot of this one, just a little bit of a transition, and then finally finish with the dark brown and really darken up this head area and immediately behind where you're going to tie the head, and come through. You don't want to cover up all the bronze, but you want to make sure that head area is fairly dark. And you can sort of trickle some of that back if you want. Whatever sort of floats your boat, I guess. Whatever works for you. So that's the body all covered up and ready to go. So the next part is obviously the shell back. Now, whatever shell back you like, I do these in naturals as well. Same process, same materials. I just use more natural textures or markers on the colour, and use like hen's shell back and stuff like this. For the Razzamattazz, what I use is a sort of a holographic iridescent strip of material, just like mylar basically, but a little bit wider, 4mm wide. So if you can find something like that, that's what you're after. If you can't get that, then a strip of mylar sheeting would work really well, something along those lines. And if you're really, really desperate, a clear piece of vinyl will be just as good. So what I'm going to do here is with my strip is I'm going to come in and I'm going to just pinch it in behind the eye where I've parked my thread, and it's not playing the game. Here we go. And I'm just going to catch it in here with a couple of turns to pinch that, and then I'm just going to go in front of this mylar. I come in with scissors and I'm going to trim away this waste piece, and I want to go reasonably close to this because I want to build up the head over the top of that. Now before we go forward and tie it all down, I'm going to come in with 2 or 3 whip finishes just to anchor down that end of the shell back, and also lock down that thread so I don't bump it while I'm trying to rib the fly. So that's the shell back in position. Now to rib it, it's however you want to rib it. For me personally, what I do is I come around towards me with the ribbing material in through the gate, and then I rib by bringing the ribbing material towards me, and just keeping some reasonable pressure, firm pressure or control over that ribbing material. I can then come through and rib it. Now you might have to sort of feel around a bit and make sure that your shell back doesn't slip, but once you get going, it's usually pretty good. And you're just taking your time, come through and rib it however you desire. Just coming across a little bit. Here we go. You see it, I'm just using my finger here to help position that shell back as we go. And just bringing that rib all the way through to the front, and then catch it in. 2 or 3 turns to catch that in. And as we go, build up a small head. And then from here, I'm just going to come in and trim away that ribbing material close to the head, and then finish off that head. Come in with a whip finisher. 2 or 3 turns of whip finish. Probably go another couple just to be sure. Take all that slack, trim away the thread, and then I just come in behind the fly and trim away that shell back close to the hook shank. And then if you've got some stray threads that you particularly want to get rid of, you can trim those away. It's not essential, but that's it. So that's the Razzamattazz nymph. That's how I do it. And again, because of the materials we're using, so this is the sort of effect that you come up with once you get that UV light in on it. I'll see if I can get this UV off a bit, and you'll get maybe a bit of a better view. And it shines through that shell back and mixes in and blends in and tapers in with all the different markers. But that's what it looks like. Okay, team. So that's Razzamattazz nymph. If you give it a go, let me know how it goes for you. It's pretty straightforward fly. Obviously, it's nothing particularly special from a design perspective, I guess. It's just a standard Czech Nymph. But the materials themselves lend itself to some good stuff. The colours and using the markers gives you a bit of a hotspot, UV reactive hotspot, and the use of the material, the pantyhose materials, makes it really nice and slim, and assists in it sort of getting down a bit quicker. All right, thanks for watching. Tight lines.